Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for some of you. My name is Hwa Jin, Program Officer at Unitar CFR Jeju, and welcome to the online capacity development workshop on disaster risk reduction strategies and digital governance for local resilience. I know we have a lot of applications registered today, but I think we can just start the introduction as more people are coming in. So I'd like to first thank the organizing staff members of the three organizations, Unitar CFR Jeju or Jeju International Training Center, the United Nations Project Office on Governance, Division for Public Institutions and Digital Governance of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, Office for Northeast Asia and Global Education and Training Institute for the efforts to put together this workshop. Let me start with a housekeeping rule. For those who are here, by default, we made you mute for now, but you will be given opportunity to speak on the session 2 and 3. And please click on the link when it's provided on the chat box to check your attendance. You just need to put your ID and name when a window pops up. This is mandatory if you wish to receive a certificate of participation. Again, thank you very much for choosing our workshop and committing your time and energy. We are currently joined by around 2,000 participants from countries in Asia Pacific. We were pleasantly surprised by your interest. It is my honor to open the workshop. I will start with an overview of the workshop. I'll be briefly speaking on the objective, some information of the participants, program structure, and the organizing institutions. After my short overview, we will invite the heads of institutions for a welcoming remarks and introductory remarks, which will be followed by expert presentation. Next slide, please. So this workshop aims to achieve two overarching objectives. First, understand the global framework for disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation in the context of SDGs. Second, build capacity on effective urban planning and digital governance solutions. So by the end of the workshop, we would expect that you achieve the following: localize and implement the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction 2015-2030. Utilize the toolkit of risk-informed governance and innovative technologies for DRR and resilience. Get familiar with MCR 2030 and diagnosis tools. Increase understanding and strengthen capacities on governance, innovation, and leveraging risk-informed governance for DRR and resilience. Next. So we have received an overwhelmingly high volume of application for this workshop. Among those who applied, we select around 2,000 in Asia Pacific. This is because the workshop targets local governments in Asia and Pacific, and accordingly, 28% of applications are from local governments. We have predominantly large participation base in India, followed by the Philippines and Pakistan. We also have participants from small island countries like Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Maldives, Vanuatu, and Solomon Islands, and more developed countries including Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, and emerging countries like China. I'm glad that we have such a diversity in terms of nationality. Gender-wise, we have more male participation, but the female participant is not insignificant, which is always encouraging. Next, please. So as you know, the workshop is organized as 3 sessions. Today, you are attending the first session that focuses on localizing global frameworks in coherence. Can you go back to the structure, please? Yes. You will be hearing from 3 experts about different disaster risk reduction frameworks. On Thursday, you will be able to get familiar with 2 policy tools. By diving into this practical session, you will be more competent in understanding the concept of disaster risk reduction and digital government. Next Tuesday, we will have our last session where you can actually use the tools and develop local strategy. So by the end of the third session, you will have not only more knowledge on the concept of disaster risk reduction, but also have the capacity to address the issue in your own community. And also we have an individual assignment, which is due April 20th. More detail will be explained on the second session. Next. Now let me introduce the organizing institute. First, it's UNITAR CIFAR Jeju, or Jeju International Training Center. UNITAR is UN Institute of Training and Research, which is an training arm for social and economic development, environmental services, and multilateral diplomacy. CIFAR Jeju can translate in English International Training Centers for Authorities and Leaders. We have a mission to facilitate measurable knowledge and skills transfer for more effective sustainable development at the local level. Former ambassador to Turkey, Mr. Hong-gi Choi, directs the center. As a career diplomat for 37 years, he served as ambassador to Turkey and Jordan and worked at the Korean Permanent Mission to the United Nations in New York, Korean Embassy in Ethiopia and Austria. He will deliver a welcoming remarks today and a closing remarks on the last day. Next, please. Well, I know it's a long acronym, but let me take you through this. The UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, Office for Northeast Asia, which is UNDRR, ONEA. It supports 5 countries, which is Republic of Korea, China, Japan, Mongolia, and DPR Korea. And GETI is the Global Education and Training Institute. It is mandated to provide capacity building support to mainstream disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation into sustainable development. It also convenes and supports intercity learning to strengthen resilience and providing capacity building and best practice sharing support to the national training institutions. Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia is the head of UNDRR Office for Northeast Asia. And before joining this post, he also has worked with the International Recovery Platform, the government of India, the World Bank, the United Nations in the field of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation for over 25 years. He will deliver an introductory remarks and a presentation today and a closing remarks on session 3. Last but not least, the United Nations Project Office on Governance, UNPOG, which is an integral part of the Division for Public Institution and Digital Governance of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. UNDESA holds up the development pillar of the UN Secretariat and works to promote the social, economic, and environmental dimension of sustainable development. It is mandated to assist member states in fostering effective, efficient, transparent, accountable, innovative, and citizen-centered public governance, administration, and services for sustainable development. The head of the UN Project Office on Governance is Mr. Bo-Kyun Shim. Prior to joining the UN office, Mr. Shim was Vice Minister of the Interior and Safety of the government of the Republic of Korea. During his long and rich experiences in state affairs from 1988 to 2018 with the Korean government, he has contributed to the government innovation, decentralization, and digital government development. He will deliver a welcoming remarks today and a closing remarks on session 3. So this is all I have for the overview, and thank you for your attention. Now, without further ado, let me give the floor to Ambassador Choi, who will deliver the welcoming remarks. Director Choi, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and good morning as well. My name is Hong-gi Choi, Director of UNITAR CIFAR Jeju. Let me first warmly welcome all of you to our online capacity development workshop on disaster risk reduction strategies and digital governance for local resilience, co-organized by 3 institutions, UNITAR CIFAR Jeju, UNPOG, and UNDRR. It has already been a few years that the three organizations come together for a workshop on the topic of disaster risk reduction. Our long-standing relationship allows us to revisit this issue again this year, even amidst COVID-19. Taking this opportunity, I would like to thank the UNPOG and DRR for putting the efforts together to organize the online capacity development workshop. As an UNITAR affiliated training center, Jeju International Training Center has supported the mission of the UNITAR since its establishment 10 years ago, which is to develop capacities to enhance global decision-making and to support country-level action for shaping a better future. While envisioning a world in which knowledge-empowered people, institutions, and organizations achieve results to overcome global challenges, the trainings and workshops we provide aim at building the capacity of local actors through exchange of experiences and dissemination of best practices. Although the global community has been overtaken by COVID-19 pandemic, we still need to carry on our duty to place the global community on the path towards sustainable development. We believe that by playing our role as training institutes, we can contribute to making governments more resilient at the local level, developing our capacity to better respond to climate change, and ultimately achieving the sustainable development goals. The topic of this workshop is disaster risk reduction, and UNITAR CIPAL Jeju has invited experts who can provide a novel perspective. This time, we attempt to interpret disaster risk reduction in the context of environment by having a lecture on ecosystem-based DRR integration in the local development strategy in the first session. A number of our participants who live and work in Asia Pacific must have noticed a significant climate change in recent years. The impact of climate change has already been scientifically proven, as in the International Panel on Climate Change report. But admittedly, local governments has been slow to take the climate aspects into making their development policy. The presentation by Dr. Tunmaru Kudil will be able to guide our participants to understand what is an ecosystem-based DRR approach and how it can be applied in policy making. We also invite Mr. Alex Mejia, Division Director of UNITAR. Mr. Mejia has led Global CIPAL Network and overseen the training activities of 20 CIPAL centers, including us. He will be in a perfect position to highlight the importance of an opportunity like this workshop, where we can further raise our awareness of why we need to develop capacity to make an actual difference on the ground. He will join with us for his presentation in the third session next Tuesday. On this note, I would like to thank our participants and presenters for being here with us today, and I look forward to having a fruitful knowledge sharing and questions and answers today. I am confident that the lectures provided by three experts will help guide our efforts in taking the global and national sustainable agenda forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Chair, for the welcoming remarks. Now let us welcome Mr. Bo-Gyun Sim for another introductory remarks. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Kim. Good afternoon and good morning, Mr. Hong-Ki Choi, Director, UNITAR CIPAL Jeju, Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia, Head of Office, UN Office for DRR. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you to this important event and to deliver this introductory remark to begin the three-day workshop. Your attendance today and active participation is an indication of the significant role of DRR in achieving the 2030 Agenda since disasters have become a great setback to progress on achieving the SDGs. I am very pleased to express my excitement for this continued partnership between our three institutions, having successfully co-organized a 4-day training workshop in June 2019. This very important and meaningful virtual workshop this year has brought together over 2,000 participants made up of national, local government officials and other stakeholders from civil society and institutions in Asia Pacific interested in or supporting cities in disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, building resilience, and sustainable development. As the world is still struggling with the unprecedented challenges from the COVID-19 pandemic, the engagement of cities and local authorities at the core of DRR and building resilience. Because local governments have been at the forefront of COVID-19 response, the significant role of local governments in DRR and building resilience cannot be overemphasized. Local governance and local partnerships in building resilience as well as public governance, especially through national to local governance and the whole of society approach to DRR are vital for building resilient societies. This workshop provides a timely and a unique platform to discuss and share knowledge on the concepts, tools, and approaches on how to localize and implement international frameworks into cities or national contexts for greater resilience and sustainable development. It will also provide an opportunity for learning about leveraging data and digital government tools for DRR and resilience. UNPOG since 2014 has been providing capacity support to the member states in strengthening public governance and leveraging digital governance, particularly AI, big data analytics, and robotics, including open data for DRR and resilience. Over the past several years, member states have also requested more practical knowledge on digital governance, including strategies and technologies for risk-informed planning and decision-making for building resilience. In response to such requests, since July 2019, UNPOG in cooperation with the UNDRR developed a training toolkit on risk-informed governance and innovative technologies for DRR and resilience. This toolkit, which was pilot tested last year through an online training workshop co-organized with the UNDRR, will also be introduced in this workshop as part of UNDESA's curriculum on governance for SDGs. As part of UNPOG's continued support to member states on DRR and building resilience, the toolkit will help address strategies and approaches on leveraging innovative technologies and building risk-informed governance. UNPOG will continue to enhance efforts in strengthening its cooperation by building a solid partnership with the UNDRR, UNITAR, CIFAR Jeju, and other related organizations to build the capacity of national, local government officials and other stakeholders in implementing the 2030 agenda. I strongly hope and believe this workshop will provide a platform for in-depth discussions, knowledge sharing, good practices, peer-to-peer learning, and the lessons learned on innovative practices. UNPOG looks forward to further engaging with you based on the feedback and the capacity development requests you may want to make for our follow-up actions. I wish you all a very fruitful discussion and a successful workshop. Thank you for your kind attention. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bogyun Shim, for the introductory remarks. Now, let me invite Mr. Sanjaya Bhatia for his introductory remarks. Please.
Thank you, Ms. Kim. Thank you, all the organizers and the team behind this event. And thank you, Ambassador Choi and Mr. Shim, for your kind remarks. And we look forward to this continuing long-term collaboration between our three organizations. To all the participants, again, welcome. We hope that this program will be very practical, very solution oriented for you, and we look forward to interacting with you through the Q&A and through the homework and other activities. We all know that COVID-19 has exposed how critical it is for cities and local governments to be able to manage risks. Impact has been disproportionately high in the cities. It is estimated that more than 100 million people are going to be pushed back into poverty, and a large number of these people live in cities and local governments. And the most vulnerable have been hit the hardest, including in the cities in the developing countries, but also in the developed world, and especially where people are living in dense, overcrowded settlements. So at the same time, we know that the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction adequately covered biological risks and health hazards, and yet we were caught by surprise. So this is time for us to look back, think what we need to improve, and I hope that this course will push you in that direction. It will show you some of the possible solutions, the applications of technology, which can help to make the world more safer and resilient and the cities more sustainable. One of the gaps that has been exposed is the lack of multi-sectoral coordination. So meaning what started as a health emergency, which should be dealt with by the health department, has turned out to become an intersectoral emergency. It impacts the prices of fuel. It impacts the price of energy. It has impacted the public transport systems, the tourism industry, aviation industry. It has impacted livelihoods all around the world. So we cannot anymore feel that a health emergency is a health emergency which should be handled by the health department, or a flood is something which has to be handled by the emergency management department, or environmental degradation is something which the environment ministry has to deal with. No, now we must realize that these are all interconnected, and if something goes wrong in one sector, it has a cascading impact on many others. With this in mind, there is a new global initiative started in January of this year, which is known as the Making Cities Resilient 2030. And this is looking at bringing new and innovative solutions to the challenges that cities face, including a 3-stage roadmap for cities so that they know where they are, where they need to go, help to develop DRR strategies, which can lead to financing of these activities, both for disaster risk reduction, also for reduction of climate risks, and to finance sustainable development, and to bring in new partners, not only the standard partners who are working in the field of urban risk reduction, but bringing in new partners, especially from the private sector, who are normally not part of such global initiatives, in an interface, in an online mechanism by which the private sector and the cities and the local governments can interact and provide services which can help to make the cities more sustainable. So we'll talk about this and other technologies more in detail as we go along. But again, I would like to welcome all of you, and I'd like to congratulate everyone on this collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatia. It was like a short preview of your presentation. We have heard very promising words from the head of organizations, but now let's have the opportunity to learn about the disaster risk reduction. From now on, Anna from UNDRR office will moderate the session. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, and also welcome to all participants. This is a workshop, so we expect questions from you to the panelists, to the experts. Today, the first session will be about localizing global frameworks in coherence. And we do expect that we are going to look at fundamental knowledge on disaster risk reduction and its linkages with the SDGs. It will familiarize you, the participants, with key concepts, terminologies, MCR 2030 initiative, and the integrating of ecosystem-based DRR into local development strategies. With the first presentation, I give the floor to Mr. Sanjay Bhatia. Over to you.
Thank you. Can I have the first slide, please? Yes, next slide, please. So let me just give a brief introduction, a simple picture of disaster risk. Just click once. Yeah. So here we see what is a hazard. We see a mountain or a hill, and there is a rock on top of it. Next, just click again and again. Click yeah. So there is a family living here, and they are exposed to this. So they have a small house there. They live in that area. That rock can fall and create a problem. So they are exposed. Now the disaster happens when the hazard and the exposure and the vulnerability interact. So when that rock actually falls, but the exposed and the vulnerable, they interact with it, and that is the disaster. Next one. And so when we talk about resilience and reducing the risks, there are many measures which are possible. One is mitigation. So for example, here they have built a retaining wall to prevent that landslide or rock falling on their living area. The other way is to create a buffer. So move away, go to a place which is safer. And there are so many other measures. Next slide, please. Now, as we try to understand risk, so it is of course the hazard, exposure, vulnerability, interaction, but we also say that there is no such thing as a natural disaster. So this is sometimes it's an interesting comment, debated a lot in the past maybe decade or more. But why we say this is because it depends a lot on our behavior. If we go and live on a floodplain, or we construct a school in the floodplain right next to the river, or we construct our housing in the most prime real estate in the city, which is facing the sea right on the coast, having a nice view. But then occasionally when the typhoon comes and the cyclone comes and the water moves in, then we should not become too excited, because that is something that is going to happen. That is nature doing what it's supposed to do. What we have to do is take the precautions and use some common sense and try to use some good planning techniques as far as possible. I know there are many constraints, but still within that, to try to use that to reduce the risk. Next slide, please. Next. So looking at the numbers, again, I'm just showing you this perception of the private sector. So not why? Because, well, cities mostly, they are all competing with each other, trying to attract investments. Cities try to show that they are a place which is ideal for citizens to live and prosper, and also for businesses to come and invest. And this will create jobs, it will bring prosperity to everyone. But what is the private sector thinking about this? So now this is from the Davos World Economic Forum. And every year they do this survey and poll of the top CEOs from the world who are gathered at Davos to see what is it that concerns them? What do they feel worried about? And as you can see on the top right corner, extreme weather, climate action, failure, biodiversity loss, they call it natural disasters, that's fine, disasters, human-made environmental disasters, all of these are ranked very, very high by the private sector. So on one end, the cities are trying to attract investments. And this is, on the other end, the CEOs feel that these are the kind of red flags. So what we need to do is, as city governments, we need to assure the CEOs and and the private sector that these kind of issues are being addressed and investments are being made to reduce these kind of hazards. And therefore, if they do come and invest in the city, it's going to be a safe investment. It is going to be a long-term profitable venture. So this is going into more the why a city should invest in reducing climate and disaster risks. Next slide, please. Next. So when we look at, so what do these risks do? They basically disrupt development. So whatever gains we achieve, we lose. If you saw the figure I mentioned in the beginning, in the opening remarks, 100 million moving into poverty. Now, that it is said that this is the first time since the end of World War II that this is happening. Large numbers of people are moving into poverty rather than out of poverty. This is all due to COVID. And COVID is a disaster. So development has been disrupted. How many years will it take to recover this? Just the aviation industry, which is all the airlines, just the airlines, not the tourism industry associated with it, not the hotel industry, not the transport and all, just the airline industry estimates 2025 for a full recovery, 2025. So we are in 21, so 4 years more. They estimate for a full recovery. So we can imagine what kind of, and of course it is still very uncertain. We don't know how it's going to unfold. What is the end game of COVID-19? Nobody knows right now. So disaster events are becoming more frequent also because of changing climate. So more frequency and intensity of events is increasing. There is more land degradation as we go along. We are there is one report, global assessment report, which says that current population of the world is 1.5 times the sustaining capacity of the earth. So we are consuming whatever there is, and it is not sustainable. Again, we are looking at issues of equity, poverty, inclusion, which have all been amplified by the COVID-19. So those societies or communities where there was more division, there was more disparity, that has been kind of amplified by COVID-19. We are looking at risk drivers which are becoming more and more complex. For example, lack of education, lack of health, lack of vaccinations, lack of livelihoods. All of these increase the vulnerability of the people, and therefore the impact of the disaster is again magnified. So next slide, please. And as I said already, the new poor, most of them are living in cities. But apart from that, the revenue of local authorities is expected to decrease by 15 to 25%. That's a huge decrease in revenues. So this is just about the local authorities. There's also the national governments, as you know, have invested huge amounts in fiscal stimulus. All that money, it has to be paid back. It has to come back from somewhere. So it will be either tax increases or it will be through inflation, but something, if there is no free money, it will have to be recovered sooner or later. So there are going to be long-lasting impacts. And we all talk about new normal. Yes, we need a new normal, but it may not be what we what we hope for, unless we can really learn the lessons, change our behavior. Next slide, please. So we are today, of course, to some extent better at disaster management. Definitely when you hear about cyclones and typhoons and search and rescue and so on, and early warning and evacuation, it's working much better than it used to 40 years ago or 50 years ago, definitely much better. So we are getting good at that. But where we want to be is where we are living more with prevention of risks. We are able to live with uncertainty. And as I was mentioning, the drivers of risk and the risk profile is changing very fast. So living with certain degree of uncertainty has to become also the normal. It can never be a perfect situation, but we need to be better able to cope with uncertainty. So that's where we need to go into the green part. Next slide, please. So the Sendai framework, many of you may already know, of course, it was adopted in 2015 for a full 15 years, going in parallel with the Agenda 2030 or the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement, and the new urban agenda. So all of these go in parallel. They share some targets, they share some indicators, and the objective is all in the same direction, to achieve sustainable development, and at the same time to reduce the disaster risk and the climate risk, which actually disrupt the sustainable development and prevent us from achieving the sustainable development. So if you read the Sendai framework, it's more like a checklist. It's a guide. Who should do what should, and there's a whole chapter on local governments and what they can do and what they should do. And I do advise you to have a look at it, because it is like a checklist. It's a simple reading, but have a look at it, because you are the opinion makers. If you don't form an opinion about these kind of global frameworks, then it will be ignored. Next slide, please. So yeah, so I already mentioned these points. Next slide, please. So again, look, when we look at resilience, one of the perspectives is we must understand, right? It's a long-term process. It is not something that we can say, okay, 2 years now I will, achieve resilience. That's not going to happen. It's firstly, the environment or the surroundings are ever changing, and therefore the risk profile will change. So for example, if you are in a city today and you do the risk profile and you make a plan and start implementing it, tomorrow a petrochemical complex is established in your city. There's a good investment, it creates a lot of jobs, which is good, but it also changes the risk profile of the city. So again, things keep changing. So resilience is a constant process. And as you can see here, some parts, some aspects of resilience can be in days, some in months, and some in years. And that's why the Sendai framework, but also the Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement, they all look at 15-year frameworks. They look at 15-year period, because they know that these kind of resilience activities take time. Next slide, please. Also, chronic stresses and the hazards, they interact and they amplify the impact. So if there is land degradation, there is deforestation, and I'm sure Murali will talk about that more. But and then there is that will cause a flood, and the flood will amplify that. Similarly, we are seeing even in COVID situation, the economic stress, the economic stresses, poverty, livelihoods, all of these are being amplified by the pandemic. So things are just getting worse because of the COVID-19. There is more joblessness, employment opportunities are lost, businesses are shut. And as I mentioned already, governments are short of revenue. They're not getting the tax revenues that they used to get, which will mean that they will spend less. Or if they don't want to spend less, they will print money. And when they print money, that will create inflation, which will increase the interest rates, which means all the people who have taken debt will have to pay more interest. So it becomes a full kind of cycle, become more and more complex. So that's why also it's important to look at what we can about the hazards, but we also need to look at the issues of chronic stress. So the environmental, economic, social, cultural, these aspects also are very, very important, and they also are part of the equation for increasing resilience. Next slide, please. So also looking at it from a system of systems approach. So like I said, something that happens in a health, for example, a health emergency is not something to be dealt with by the health department alone, because the impact is going to be on everyone. And that's what we have seen in COVID-19. Similarly, in Kobe, there was an earthquake, for example, and at that point of time, Kobe port used to be the #1 port in Japan. Now, now the Kobe port is the #2 port in Japan, and it has been so for more than 15 years, because it suffered from the earthquake and has not been able to do the full catch up. So impacts of disasters. So a disaster happened. It was an earthquake. What happened? What was the result? Was the Kobe port was impacted. As a result, the revenues that the Kobe city used to earn from the Kobe port have reduced. So, so their spending power has also reduced. So, an event somewhere can have an impact on another sector. So we need to understand and have this holistic approach of inter-systems coordination. Next slide, please. And then, of course, there are a lot of tools available. There are capacity development programs and tools that you can use to help the city plan better. So identifying the risks, identifying what are the weak areas, using tools such as the scorecard, which is on the right side. And then once you have identified the weak areas, then planning the actions that can help to address those weaknesses, converting those actions into bankable projects, raising the financing for those actions, and then looking at implementation. So the Sendai framework also says and asks local governments to develop disaster risk reduction strategies and plans by early, and then at least 10 years of implementation of those plans. I would suggest not only disaster risk reduction, but looking at it more holistically from resilience perspective. So resilience plans and strategies, and then aligning them with the implementation of the Agenda 2030, the SDGs, and the Paris Agreement commitments. Next slide, please. So there is a new initiative, which I briefly mentioned in my opening remarks also. This is a 10-year initiative, Making Cities Resilient 2030. And I encourage all partners also to join this, but also all of those of you who are representing cities to approach your city governments and have them join this. Next slide, please. It builds on the 10-year experience of the of a 10-year Making Cities Resilient campaign, which was from 2010 to 2020. And the MCR 2030 is from 2021 to 2030. So the earlier campaign had 4,360 cities as part of the campaign. And we expect larger numbers even this time. Already, the area of coverage of the MCR 2030 is more than 53 million people. So we expect that number to really increase. It's just started, as I mentioned, but something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. So it builds on the experience of that. What was seen was that even looking at developing a DRR strategy, and why a DRR strategy is important, because as I mentioned, it helps you to identify your weak areas, to determine the actions, and then develop bankable projects to get financing for those actions. So you are able to take steps which can help in increasing the resilience. And if you see here, one of the studies showed that the MCR cities in the orange and the non-MCR cities in the purple, availability of local DRR strategies, you can see a huge difference. Next slide. Similarly, in forms of how they are communicating the risk information to the communities, again, we see that the purple part, the blue and the yellow is the making cities resilient cities, and the purple is the non, those who did not join, and you can see again a lot of difference. Next slide, please. And then improvements made by local governments, so better governance systems to manage disaster risk, a better understanding of disaster risk among the city departments, more resilient infrastructure. All these indicators, you see again, the purple ones are the lowest, and those are the non. So that's why also it is important to grab hold of such global initiatives and tap all the resources which are available because they can help the cities. Next slide, please. So it learns the lessons from this, including more providing a clear resilience roadmap to the cities, so cities know where they are and where they need to go. It provides the tools which are already available. So no new tools, only synergizing or bringing under one umbrella all the existing tools, so that a kind of a one-stop place where cities can easily find these tools, and a focus on financing. So how to access finance, and then also looking at the vertical link between the national and the local governments, and encouraging national programs on urban resilience, and bringing in the private sector, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So objectives are to help cities know better, plan better, and implement better. So 3 stages. And that's what the focus is. And all kinds of partners are joining, and they are providing services. And we understand that some partners will need to charge fees for their services, so that is also fine. We just ask them to say upfront that this is not a free service, it will be charged, or that there are certain criteria for the service. Next slide, please. Also, it is trying to promote the city-to-city exchange and learning. So this is the MCR 2030 in a kind of one page. You see the resilience roadmap, stage A, B, and C cities. Cities do not necessarily join at A, because there are cities, so it tries to recognize that certain cities are more mature or more sophisticated than others. So many cities are joining at C, many cities are joining at B, many cities are joining at A. And when they join at A, B, or C, then they progress further. And when they are at C, of course, they are at that stage when they are actually looking at implementation of DRR actions, including, as you see, access to finance, resilient infrastructure, nature-based solutions, integrating climate risk, and so on. Next slide, please. So these are the key partners who are what we call the core partners. You see here, they have been engaged in urban risk reduction for many, many years, and including the big networks like UCLG and ICLE. But we also have supporting entities like other non-governmental organizations and UN agencies and others And we also have what we call service providers who can offer their services both free of charge or on a cost basis or a fee basis. And this is all available through an online tool called what we call the dashboard. Next slide, please. And this is the link, mcr2030.undrr.org. Have a look at it, go there and see, and do encourage your cities and also partners and consultants and others who could join. Next slide, and that's the end. This is some resources which I will leave for you. And with that, and the next slide is the end of my intervention. So thank you for your patience and listening, and look forward to your questions. Over.
Thank you, Sanjaya. We have received a number of questions from participants. May I ask you one question before we move to the next speaker? I have one question for you: how to optimize community experience with disaster to increase their resilience? This is because many people may forget about past disaster experience. For example, people in Indonesia previously document their disaster experience in local knowledge, such as a poem, oral history, but this kind of knowledge may not be relevant anymore in this time. What is your thinking? And also another question about how you deal with compound risk, like COVID and earthquakes, for example. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anna. And thank you for those questions from the participants. Well, there is a concept known as telling live lessons, and there is a very good guidance note on that, and I'll share the link on it in the chat in a while. And it gives very good examples of how the information of events is captured for the next generation. So, so for example, even right now we are facing this COVID situation. Will people remember after 40 years? We don't know. So how many of us have even heard of the Spanish flu, which killed millions of people in 1920? But I don't think, I mean, maybe we read about it in a book or in a newspaper article, but nobody has has ever heard about it from word of mouth from maybe grandparents. So the information does get lost. So there are many examples in Kobe, for example. There is an earthquake museum on the Kobe earthquake. So everything pre-earthquake, during the earthquake, post-earthquake recovery, everything documented and visualized and kept there. So younger people, so school children are taken there. In Aceh, there is a tsunami museum. In Sichuan, and there is a city in the Sichuan province of China. There is a city called Bechuan, which bore the brunt of the earthquake because it was on a fault line. What they have done is they've maintained that it's empty now. It's fully relocated because it is on a fault line, but the entire city has been moved, but the entire city is preserved, and the roads have been cleared, but the buildings are still preserved, and people are brought there so that they can see and they don't forget. So there are these means and many more of, and I'll share the link with you. And for the compounding and cascading emergencies, as we call them, we have to prepare for multi-hazards, and we have to prepare for complex emergencies. We cannot simply say, okay, we prepare for a flood. No, prepare for a flood, where the flood waters will go into an industrial area, as a result of which toxic chemicals will leak into the flood water, move into the agricultural area, move into the groundwater. So think through these scenarios and look at the possible complexity that can happen, and then prepare for that. That is what we need to prepare for. We can't just prepare single hazard never, but definitely not now. Over.
Thank you, Sanjaya. We are pleased now to give the floor to Dr. Murali, who is Murali Tumaru Kudi, who is the Operation Manager on UN Environment Program. He will present us now integrating ecosystem-based DRR in local development strategy. Over to you, Dr. Murali. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction. And I'm extremely happy to be with this large group of participants and also the organizers this morning in Geneva, but also afternoon in India, Korea, Philippines, Pakistan, and many other countries where I'm noticing participants are joining from. I want to start by congratulating the organizers for organizing this very important event during this COVID period, using the media, using the new media which has been made possible by COVID, that instead of reaching 20 or 50 people as we used to do in the past in real classrooms, we are now able to reach more than 200 people at this moment on Zoom and maybe many more in YouTube. And eventually, as a recorded version, thousands of people will watch this session. So I congratulate you for that. I'm also very happy to meet old friends such as Sanjaya, with whom I had a long work experience. And as I said, I'm also very delighted to see the large number of participants who are joining. There's an election going on in India, many parts of India, so the participation is less than optimal today, but I'm expecting this to go up the next session. We are organizing this session during the COVID period. And COVID has many lessons for us, including on the whole idea of urbanization and local governance. Sanjay has already touched upon a number of these issues. But one thing I noticed during this COVID period is how important your local government is to your welfare, is something which was brought home during this COVID, because all this idea of lockdown, which happened across the world, almost all countries except maybe Sweden went into a lockdown mode, which meant that the mobility of people were restricted, that you were constrained to wherever you were. So ultimately, where you were became very important. How that particular place where you were was governed became most important. In the past, as the world was more globalized, one was connected to another, where you lived was not as much important, but now it is. So people are taking more and more interest in local government. The local government are taking more and more interest in governing their place better, because they know ultimately it is up to themselves to make their cities more resilient, be it to COVID, be it to natural disasters. There's also something else which happened during COVID. As Sanjay has said, millions of people, up to 100 million people, are returning into poverty. But there is also a lot of people who are moving out of the cities into smaller cities and even villages, as the whole idea of work from home became a possibility. So people who used to work in San Francisco came down to village in Philippines or a city in India. People who are working in Dubai moved out to Bangkok or Maldives. And all this is also having a rejuvenation of smaller cities. So as much as it is important that we create better and better facilities in terms of infrastructure, in terms of IT, in terms of restaurants in smaller cities, it's also important that we make our cities more resilient. I want to make a final point before I move into my main topic. This is the significance of climate change. Since the start of the century, we have been saying that climate change is the most defining crisis of our generation, and it remains. Now, of course, we are in the middle of COVID, and all our attention is captured by COVID. But climate change has not gone anywhere. Climate change is still very much around, still in front of us. It still remains one of the major challenges. So many of the things which we are talking about in terms of disaster resilience is also applicable to climate-induced disaster risk. Climate change magnifies almost every disaster, except maybe the geological disasters, which we are dealing with. So as much as we are talking about disaster risk, we are also talking about climate change risk today. Today, my main topic is ECO-DRR for local development. ECO-DRR is the short form for ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. Next slide, please. I would actually talk about three things today, and I would leave enough time for you to ask questions. The first question is, why are ecosystems important to reducing impact from disasters? The second point is, if ecosystems are important, what exactly can we do as a community, as a nation, as cities, to use ecosystems as a way of reducing disaster risk? And the third and the most important point for you is, how can ECO-DRR solution be implemented at a local level, at a city level? So these are the three issues which I will cover today. Next slide, please. Some of you may have seen this picture, which is quite famous in the disaster risk reduction community. And also it may have been introduced to you during a session on resilience. This is a picture of two countries, and the mud road in the middle is the border between the two countries. And the country on the right side of the picture has hills, and on which you see some trees, and the country on the left, you do not see any trees left on that. And there are many historical reasons why it came to be like that, but it still is the case. Could you have the next slide, please? So these are the two countries which they still exist. I have been to this place. On the right side, what you see is this. So this is on an island called Hispaniola, the Caribbean. On the right side, you see Dominican Republic. And on the left side, you see Haiti. So right side, you have trees, Dominican Republic. Left side, you have no trees, and that's Haiti. Next one, please. So in 2004, the tropical storm Jean hit that island of Hispaniola. Same island, just two different countries. And in Haiti, it had 6,000 people dead due to that tropical storm. Tropical storm, as you know, is not as big as a cyclone, but still it killed 6,000 people. And on the other side, it had 18 people dying on the Dominican Republic side. So this set this thought in motion as to whether the fact that there was much less deforestation on one side had anything to do with the lower damage and lower casualties on the other side. And this in many ways was the start of the thread of eco-DRR as a discipline. The concept itself was always there, but the conceptualization of it, the fact that more people taking attention, happened during the 2004 tropical storm. Same situation also happened in the 2004 tsunami of the Indian Ocean. The Indonesian tsunami on 26th of December 2004 affected 19 countries, all the way from Indonesia to Somalia. More than 262,000 people died in that natural disaster, one of the biggest natural disasters in our lifetime. And that's when we really saw how furious the nature can be and how powerless we are. But even during that tsunami, which hit 19 countries, coastlines, we saw that in some situations, when there was a mangrove on the coastline, there was less damage behind. So the researchers started looking at it and say, could mangrove have reduced disaster risk? And hence started this project called Mangroves for Future. And I must admit that mangroves are not really an effective way of defending against tsunamis. Tsunamis are far too powerful for that. But mangroves certainly have a role in disaster risk reduction. But the point is that around 2004, a number of similar incidents actually produced the critical mass of interest in the academic community to start to look at ecosystems as a way of reducing disaster risk. Next slide, please. Since then, we have looked at multiple natural hazards and multiple ecosystems which could produce some degree of buffering to a disaster risk. Sanjaya, in his presentation, showed the conceptual representation of how disaster risk, which is a rock on the top of a hill, can be prevented from being a disaster, which is affecting the community, the family which was behind, by putting a barrier or eliminating the risk altogether, or asking the family to move away. There are many ways of dealing with disaster risk. So in ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, what we are attempting to see is that, is there any way in which we could use an ecosystem, such as a mangrove, such as a forest, such as a river, a lake, as a way of preventing or buffering a disaster risk. And then we looked at what are those natural hazards against which one could actually defend by using ecosystems. The first of this was drought, which due to climate change is going to get increasingly more common and severe. So is flooding, surprisingly, that the climate change would increase both the severity and the frequency of flooding. And why is that? You have both droughts and floods, both going to increase in severity and frequency. The reason is simple. One of the predicted impacts of climate change is that the rainfall, the total rainfall which falls in a city or in a country or in a region, may not reduce much, but the intensity of that rainfall would increase, which means more rain will fall in shorter duration, which means the period between a rainy day to another rainy day will increase. So while the rain is falling, it will create flood because more rain is falling in less time. But because the distance between two rainfall days is increased, it will also increase drought. We also have sandstorms. The Sahara, which even reached Geneva the other day, happens across India, Indian subcontinent, happens across Middle East all the way up to Iran. So sandstorms, major hazard. Coastal storms, we are hearing more and more, even in regions which did not have this situation. Landslides, one of the most common and increasing for a number of reasons, not just because climate change or more rainfall. It's also because more and more people are living in areas, edge of the areas where they normally used to live. They're building roads, they're planting trees, or they're cutting trees and planting crops, and they're creating newer hazards. So landslide is one of the growing hazards across the world. And of course, there is sea level rise due to climate change. So these are all hazards which we see you are familiar with. And then you have the potential of natural infrastructure. So you have lakes, which can be, and ponds, which can be a way of storing rainwater during rainy period, and which could give some buffering to droughts. If you have floodplains, upland of a city, naturally, they provide you the buffering for a city to protect the city from flooding. And this has been used, especially in Europe. There is this whole concept of making space for water as a way of preventing floods. So it's not so much to bound the river or bund the city, but it is to allow the water to expand into floodplains before it enters the city, thereby protecting the city. Wetlands and coral reefs are known to protect against the severity of storms. And for landslides, there is clear solution that certain type of revegetation can prevent landslides. And in sea level rise, one could actually have sand dunes as an effective barrier. So there are many ways in which we can use natural infrastructure as a way of defending against natural hazards. The question really then is, what of these solutions are applicable in your local areas? At the United Nations Environment Programme, we have developed an approach called opportunity mapping. And what it does is the following. You take any geographical area, and it could be any level of unit. It could be a city, it could be a province, it could be a country, or it could be a region, where we can look at all the prevailing natural hazards, all the existing ecosystems, and all the new ecosystems which can be brought in, and see which of these hazards can be buffered by the existing ecosystems, by augmenting them, or by creating new ecosystems, such as planting a mangrove forest along a coastline. Those of you who are interested to know more about opportunity mapping, please get in touch with me after this session so that we can give you more training on it, more access to this opportunity mapping, and so on. One of the advantages of ecosystem-based solutions or nature-based solutions, as they are increasingly being called, is that in addition to achieving disaster risk reduction, it also provides other services to human beings, even if there's no disaster. For example, if you have a lake or a pond, clearly during a drought event, it can provide some buffer. Clearly during a flood event, it can give some buffer. But even if there is no drought or flood, it has many other services, such as it could be a base for tourism, it could be a base for fishing, it could be a place for recreation. So there are many ecosystem services which can actually be provided even if there's no disaster. And each of the ecosystem provide a set of ecosystem services which goes beyond disaster risk reduction. So the services which is created by nature-based solution is DRR plus. Whereas if you go for a conventional solution, such as a concrete wall to prevent flood, then what you have is a concrete wall. There is no additional externality which is created, which has social benefit. So this is the main point which we are trying to tell people, that ecosystem-based solution provide a disaster risk element, but also a set of other community benefits going beyond disaster risk. So even if the disaster did not happen, such as a tsunami may not happen for next 1,000 years, but a coastal mangrove which you create as a buffer could provide the service from day one. If you create an upland floodplain around a city, even if the flooding don't happen in 100 years, it still creates an area for recreation for the people in the community. Every year, the floodplain exists. Next slide, please. So here is a conceptual framework of the natural-based solution, and natural-based solution in a way contribute to sustainable development. It's too small for me to read it out, but the slide will be shared with you. But the point which we want to make is that nature-based solution is not just about disaster risk reduction. It's also about contributing to sustainable development. Next one, please. And here are some good examples of how nature-based solutions are working in reality. So here's a coastal mangrove. It certainly buffers against coastal storm surges and some type of tsunamis, low intensity tsunamis in some pockets. We are not recommending mangroves as an exclusive solution for storm surges, no. But even if there is no tsunami, it creates a livelihood for the local community in terms of fishing. So that's a positive benefit even without a disaster. Next one, please. So here is the urban floodplain upland. So you have a situation where urban areas are flooded, but if you do have a floodplain upland, a wetland upland, it can absorb a lot of the water, buffering the flooding impact. Next one, please. These are urban area, drought areas. You would see this, even in very desert areas, all these small wetlands. Next one, please. One issue which is getting increasingly challenging is forest fire management. In the past, forest fires happened in the forest far away from where people are living. But increasingly, you must be noticing that in California, in Greece, in Israel, in Russia, you see in Australia, you see massive fire events in remote forests as well as urban woodlots. And this is exacerbated by changing climate. So how do we deal with forest fire in an ecosystem approach? And there are ways of doing it by looking at the existing forest and managing it better, by looking at the existing urban woodlots and maybe changing the species composition. Maybe certain type of species are more prone to fire. So there are ways in which urban fires, urban woodlot fires can be handled by ecosystem-based solutions. Next one, please. And then you have landslides and vegetation cover. This is so common. Sanjay was talking about Beichuan, and I have been to Beichuan and a number of other earthquake areas in Haiti as well. In Beichuan area, during the Sichuan earthquake, there are a number of landslides which happen, and it destabilized the land a little bit. And during the rainy season which followed, there are hundreds of additional landslides which happened. In Kerala, during the 2018 floods, 493 people died in this massive flooding event. But most of the death actually happened due to landslides. As I mentioned, the beginning part of my presentation, most of the landslides were triggered by some type of human intervention in that area, be it cutting off the existing forest which was there, be it building a road through that area on the slopes. It could be having a quarry in that area. It could be changing from one type of tree to another type of agricultural crop. Or it could be building houses using heavy construction material. Now, regardless of the factor, it is true that the number of landslides are on the rise and human intervention is causing increasing landslides. And of course, high intensity rains exacerbate that possibility, including by creating saturation and causing debris flows. Clearly, there are nature-based solutions to deal with it. Next one, please. And this is Switzerland, where avalanches, the snow snowballing into bigger and bigger blocks and crashing down the valley, was a huge problem in the past. But over 100 years back, they figured out that if you could create a barrier of trees between the top of the hill where trees will not grow and the bottom of the hill where trees will grow and below in the valley community are living, it could prevent avalanches from forming or accumulating. So they mandated this concept called ecosystem protection forest in Switzerland over 100 years back. And that since then, there is significant drop in the number of avalanches. And this is now considered an international best practice and being practiced in other places. Next slide, please. Now I'll come to some of the ecosystems, eco-DRR in practice. Next one, please. So we'll go to one very interesting work which is currently ongoing in the Indian province of Kerala. The United Nations Environment Programme has been implementing eco-DRR approaches in number of countries, in Afghanistan, in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Haiti, but on small pilot projects. But as a matter of scaling it up, we conceived an idea that if we could work with a government who is already implementing a number of development projects and incorporate the idea of ecosystem-based solution into it, one could achieve a lot more disaster risk reduction and a lot more acceptance to the idea. So if you could click more on slide, please. Please some more, yeah. So in India, we have this massive social security scheme called the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. It is over $12 billion in value per year. The number 2.6 million we have given is only for one province, which is only 3% of the country. So the actual number of people who are guaranteed work is close to 100 million. 100 days of paid work, and they do all type of work, building roads and digging drains and clearing forest and slopes and so on and so forth. So what we did was, in each of the type of activities which they were undertaking, we plugged in an ecosystem-based solution into it. So we created a guidance on eco-safe roads. We created a guidance on riverbed restoration, on quarry restoration, on coastal restoration, on pond conservation, urban flood mitigation, and forest and woodland fire mitigation. And these guidance notes are available, and I'll be very happy to share it with those who are interested in it. And now we are at the second phase, that we are scaling it up to the whole country and including adding dryland management, avalanche management into the concept. So by bringing a theoretical concept and the engineering aspect into a developmental project at the very bottom city level, we are able to reach potentially tens of thousands of cities and local government areas. And this is what I really want you to take home from my session today. That eco-DRR is not a modern, sophisticated solution. This is something which the community has always been doing and will continue to do. All that we have to do as scientists and policymakers is to inject a little bit of scientific framework into it. And we don't need to design new projects and concept for it. We just have to inject our idea into an existing project. If you are building a road, just make it, eco-safe. If you are cleaning a river, think of what are the possibilities of slope stabilization and floodplain protection. So by doing this, at your local community level, you can achieve a lot more disaster risk reduction. Next one, please. We have similar work going on in Indonesia for forest fire management by restoration of peatland. Next one, please. Yeah, please continue to click. The international framework on disaster risk reduction, the Sendai framework. You have the UN framework on UN framework convention on climate change, UNFCCC, the Convention on Biological Diversity, Ramsar Convention, Convention to Combat Desertification, and UNESCO Convention on Man and Biosphere. So we are working with each of these conventions to look at how eco-DRR can be injected into those conventions. Next one, please. Finally, next one, please. Next one. So we have a partnership of a number of organizations on ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. And one of these parties could be in your area. please get in touch with them for more capacity building, more technical assistance. If not, please get in touch with us and we will be very happy to continue this discussion. Next one, please. Finally, I want to present this opportunity to you where we are running a new massive open online course on nature-based solution for disaster and climate resilience. We started in early January. We have more than 15,000 people who are registered now. It's about 6 hours of self-paced learning. The learning material is available in 7 separate languages. And it has exclusive interviews with world leaders, practitioners, case studies. And you are able to network with these 15,000 people and a lot more. Our target is to reach 100,000 participants by end of this year. I'll be sharing the link with you. I encourage you to please register for this session and join and learn a lot more about the topic. I will conclude by saying, for those who are academically bent and want to know more about, we have actually published a book on this topic and it's available free. I'll be sharing the link with you here. And please continue to get back to us, network with those participants in this group, as well as join the new MOOC and get a much wider community of practice. I will stop at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murali, for your comprehensive presentation. We have 15 questions that still remain for you in the chat and in the Q&A, and I will ask you a few of them to you. One is about considering the rating of uncertainties in climate. How much can researching further towards eco-DRR be viable? And also, the person believes that eco-infra trees and others are itself vulnerable in today's concurrent disasters. So how many countries, to your knowledge, has a specific guidelines as to follow eco-DRR? And the second question is how we measure and compare, for instance,
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. You, in the last 30 seconds, probably I lost. But there are a number of questions embedded into one question, but I'll try to answer those questions which I understood. The first question, or the last question, was that how many countries actually have guidance on eco-DRR? I do not have a specific number in my mind, but I can say that a number of countries have guidance on specific areas. For example, I mentioned Switzerland for protection forest, Netherlands for making space for water, Germany for making space for water. All of Europe is now understanding the concept of eco-DRR. We have a number of examples in Japan where after tsunami, the land use plans were changed to put eco-DRR solutions. Indonesia, we have good examples. India now, as part of this, is starting. So there are a number of case studies, number of good examples, and number of specific areas where the governments are moving into eco-DRR. The area where we are finding the biggest challenge is in cracking engineers and planners to move to eco-DRR. The concrete-based solution for disaster risk reductions have set engineering code of practice, and therefore engineers know how to design them, bankers know how to finance them, and the policymakers know how to adopt them. But when it comes to eco-DRR, the engineering code of practice still doesn't exist, and which means engineers are not able to design them the way a bridge is designed or a coastal retaining wall is designed. We are trying to crack those problems as well. Should I continue to answer that, or would you ask me another question?
Then you can continue. We have more questions in the chat that I will let you answer after the next speaker start the presentation. So
Thank
if you
you.
want to finalize your...
So the other question was, aren't these eco-DRR solutions themselves vulnerable to the changing climate? The answer is yes. Of course, it depends upon which of the trajectories climate change is going to take. There are many possibilities. If you imagine the 4.5 degree centigrade rise in climate change, of course, many of our eco-DRR solutions themselves would be vulnerable. But if you have to achieve the 1.5 degree trajectory, then many of our eco-DRR solutions would be able to buffer against those projected disasters. In between, the situation could be one way or the other. But as I mentioned before, this is also true for any other solution, be it made in brick and mortar or concrete. That if you have bigger and bigger storms, no building codes will be able to stand that. But the main difference in eco-DRR is that as long as the ecosystems are staying, they are providing a set of supplementary benefit in addition to the conventional DRR solutions. So therefore, it has an edge. But we are also cognizant that eco-DRR is not the silver bullet, the one-stop solution for all DRR problems. No. We think this should be done considering every other solutions, considering the potential disaster risk, and then ensuring that either one or the other is chosen, or a combination of the above, a hybrid solution is chosen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murali. And we'll let you continue answer and discussing with the participants through the Q&A. There are many questions, including some related to the ENV ecosystem matrix. Let me give the floor now to Dr. Dana Samuel, who is Associate Capacity Development Expert in UN Project Office on Governance, DPI-DG UNDESA. He will present us the risk-informed governance and innovative technology for DRR and resilience. Dana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, thank you everybody for your attention, and thanks Woo-Young for sharing this exciting video. I think it's a great pleasure to be presenting alongside very experienced colleagues who have given more detailed and technical analysis about the concept of disaster risk reduction and ecosystems. I think the video we just watched sums up the basic facts about disaster situations across the globe, the data, and the need to promote risk-informed governance. So next slide, please. This presentation will focus on the governance aspect, and it's have two broad sections, which I would like to be snappy. I know we are running behind time. And we will have the introduction of a toolkit that was prepared based on the express needs of member states. Then after that, we now delve into the governance aspect, then we sum up for today. Next slide, please. Just proceed to the next one. So this is the cover page of the toolkit I'm coming to talk to you about. It's part of an overall curriculum of toolkits governance for SDGs prepared by the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government of UNDESA, which UNPOG is part of. Next slide, please. So this toolkit was developed in 2019 based on the express needs of member states. They asked for two things. They wanted to know more about risk-informed governance and about innovative technologies for disaster risk reduction and resilience. So this was co-produced by UNPOG and UNDRR. So the toolkit tried to combine the aspects of risk-informed governance or governance at the same time trying to combine that with innovative technologies. Next slide, please. So there are about 10 other toolkit, 9 other toolkits which are currently being finalized by the division or UNDES's Division for Public Institutions, and it generally focuses on the governance aspect for Sustainable Development Goals or SDGs. Next slide, please. So what happened is that this toolkits have been developed, all these toolkits developed in partnership with other agencies and other experts who provided feedback during the review process. So it don't just have to be a kind of a supply-driven thing. Whilst it's also a demand-driven, we try to also get feedback in polishing it up. And one thing is that these toolkits are supposed to be living documents. So as time goes on, we keep updating. And we try to bring together all our partners who are experts in the various sections of this training toolkits. Next slide. The other aspect is that this toolkit, as I mentioned, the objective is to train member states and strengthen their capacities in the areas of risk-informed governance or governance innovation for disaster risk reduction, especially for LDCs, LLDCs, including small island states. And it's supposed to help establish more or let participants know more about governance and also about digital solutions and other aspects, as I mentioned. Next slide. The other one is that this toolkit can be customized based on the needs of users and member states or people who does this. And it includes group work, practical exercises, case studies for peer-to-peer learning and exchanges. And all institutions, including individuals interested in working towards disaster risk reduction and resilience, are invited to use this toolkit. And one other interesting part is that this toolkit is free of charge. Next slide, please. What I would like to also share is that we have 3 broad models with 11 or 12. We have 12 because we just included a new model on the COVID-19, which came after the toolkit was developed. So we just included one to have 12 sub-models. So broadly, the toolkit is designed in this way. We have several models addressing several aspects of what member states needs to know or participants would like to know. Next slide. The other aspect is that we have this overview or cost structure for which can be adopted, as I mentioned, for a 5-day period. So this is a kind of at a glance agenda for your attention. Yeah, next slide, please. So this toolkit was previously pilot tested when the first part was completed or when it was first developed. And we had this pilot testing, which we also received feedback from member states, including participants from both East Asia, Pacific, and even parts of Africa who participated. And details of this can be accessed through the link on our websites and including the workspace of UNDRR. and other people who may want to know what really happened during those sections. Next slide, please. So we invite participants of this workshop to have access to this toolkit. As I mentioned, you can download the toolkits online and also contribute and also provide your feedback. So the first link is a kind of questionnaire where you can submit your feedback and comments and suggestions. And the other one is to download if you really want to use it and access it. Next slide, please. So this one, I now move to the second part of my presentation, which I talked about. It's about the governance aspect of disaster risk reduction. How do we innovate governance to be able to meet the current needs or current exigencies of our time? So one, public governance generally refers to administrative authority, political, economic aspects of how countries are managed or the affairs of countries are driven. But governance shouldn't just be about popular government. It should go beyond that, especially if you want to address disaster risk reduction. It should delve more deeper into including it being risk informed. And risk informed, by that we mean that it should bring about, there should be extensive collaboration between the various stakeholders, as well as going more further to include both local governments at the local level or authorities at the local level, as well as making sure that these people are fully engaged and understand all the happenings during the disaster, even before and after the disasters happen. Next slide, please. So apart from that, the UN Economic and Social Affairs and UNDESA proposed these principles of public governance. So by effective governance, which can be applied to all sectors of our society, should look at making sure that governance should be effective, it should be accountable, inclusive. In that sphere, we talk about transparency, we talk about competence, and we talk about innovation. So this gives an idea as to what kinds of governance we want to use in implementing both the 2030 agenda as well as the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Next slide. In a related development, what happened is that apart from the 2030 agenda, which talks more on governance, the Sendai framework also calls on government to make decisions, or their kinds of governance should be risk informed, and this should incorporate other stakeholders and try to integrate all actors at all sectors and at all levels of government. And this could even include the private sector and the civil society organizations. Another one is that the priority 2 of the Sendai framework particularly mentions that there's the need to strengthen disaster risk governance to be able to manage disaster risks. Next slide. So risk-informed governance, broadly or generally, would like to make sure that the decision-making process is risk-informed or risk-based. People should try to understand how threats or crises happen, and development should try to incorporate issues about risks or reducing risks. So all global agendas, including the 2030 Agenda, Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Addis Ababa Action for Action Agenda, all calls on government to be risk informed. Next slide. So public governance innovation is another aspect, not just being risk informed, or that it should be innovative. And innovation means that we have new ideas, new approaches, and new technology, including rules and regulations. And this must try to not just being implemented, but being able to impact the lives of people, especially the vulnerable and those left behind. Because one of the major principles of the 2030 Agenda is leaving no one behind. So this calls for innovations in all aspects. Innovations or public governance innovation happens at different spheres of life, both at the institutional level, at the organizational level, at the process level, and also during the conceptual stage. So it cuts across all sectors, given these types of public governance innovation. Next slide. This other aspect is that now we want to look at how public governance could be channeled or could be implemented or done to be able to address disaster risk reduction. So I'll just highlight it, that one of the key components or dimensions is that there should be effective leadership. Leadership should try to incorporate other things and make it more effective, more accountable, more transparent. And the second aspect is that there should be effective national to local coordination, government coordination. And I think one of the key ideas for this workshop is that we should promote local governance or local government participation in all aspects of life, including disaster risk reduction. Next slide. So the other aspect is that stakeholder engagement, especially whole of society approach, is very paramount. Crisis preparedness and its response strategies should be planned well, and including all aspects of development, infrastructure, be it everything should be guided and well planned to be able to prepare ahead of disasters before they happen, and how we are able to approach them when they happen, and even aftermath, how we build back better. Next slide. There is this component of effective communication, which is very key. And I think the other aspect is that we also talk about partnerships, both within and outbound or outside. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has come to really highlight the need for building partnerships, especially when crises happen or when disasters happen. They don't have boundaries, they go beyond that. So there's the need for both in country or in society collaboration and outside. So partnerships are very important. Next slide. And leveraging innovative technologies, ICTs or STIs, that's science, technology, innovation, including frontier technologies, is one of the emerging trends that has proven very useful in times of disasters. And decision-making should not just be done in a haphazard way. There's a need to make it data-driven. It should be risk-informed. It should be evidence-based. So data-driven decision-making should be part of the disaster management process. Next slide. So having finished with this, because disaster issues are very important even to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, it has been incorporated in about 8 of the SDGs, and these are listed here. Next slide, please. The other aspect is that issues about disasters or DRR should not be limited at the national level or just at the international level. We call, or is advised, that this should be incorporated or mainstream into national development plans. And this chart here provides a kind of principle that should guide how to mainstream disasters into national plans or developments. So from the institutional aspect, from the finance, the policies, the planning, even to the level of capacity building, disaster or DRR should be incorporated in all these aspects. Next slide. So with risk-informed governance, data issues, including open government data, when we imbibe all these aspects, it makes sure that we are able to be guided through early warning system. And there is also real-time awareness creation when even before disasters happen. And also we get feedback. So incorporating technology, including all these great plans, are able to help to make all responses in and recovery being risk-informed. Next slide. So these other aspects talk about how frontier technologies are critical to all phases of the disaster management process, be it mitigation, response, recovery, and preparedness. So disaster risk reduction or technologies are very important, and we'll be looking at aspects of how it has been used. Next slide. So in the early detection stage, the rapid diagnosis and all those things, these are frontier technologies or digital government through ICTs have been used and continue to be used and has proven very useful in all the phases of the disaster management process. Next slide. So I just want to get a 1-minute video here, then I try to push ahead on disaster risk, on frontier technologies and ICT.
Frontier technologies are innovative and they grow fast. They have the potential to transform our societies, our lives, the economy, and our environment. They can make sustainable development a reality, improving people's lives, promoting prosperity, and protecting our planet. But they also threaten jobs and raise new ethical and moral challenges. A new report on frontier technologies for sustainable development by the UN's Department of Economic and Social Affairs takes a closer look at the potentials and challenges of frontier technologies. While many will gain from them, many more may be left behind or displaced by technological change. Governments play a central role in creating more winners and fewer losers of technological change. More than ever, it is important to create infrastructure and institutions that promote innovation, diffusion, and adoption of technology. This issue touches every country, and the United Nations and the global community are in a unique position to help, making knowledge and technology available to all and fulfilling the promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Working together, we can harness the full potential of frontier technologies for a sustainable future that leaves no one behind.
Thank you. Next slide. So these are the next one. We'll be talking about the examples of how, so this is a case in Japan about how big data and Internet of Things are helping to prepare ahead of disasters, especially in floods. Next slide. So a current issue which has been a major disaster in the past year and now has been the COVID-19 and disaster and innovative technologies or ICTs and digital technologies have been used in all aspects. So especially for COVID-19, for information sharing, the participation of citizens. Next slide. We have issues about e-health now happening, contact tracing, nations coming together to build partnership through, and it has helped also through technologies. Next. So with social distancing and virus tracing or contact tracing have all been enabled or enhanced as a result of digital government technologies. And with screening and with a screening of infections and diagnosis, all this has been enhanced or done well because of the adoption or leveraging digital technologies and ICTs. Next slide. With quarantine and clinical management, ICTs have all proven very important in all these phases or these areas. Next. So in the end, I would like to highlight the following. We found that multi-stakeholder engagement through whole of society approach is very key, a governance aspect.
We lost communication.
Samuel,
Dr.
we
Dana.
don't hear you.
Dana, we cannot hear you. Okay, so while Dana come back to us in a few, let's give him a few minutes. We wait, we keep the presentation. His connection maybe will come back. Let me, we have a few minutes to close the session today. We plan for still 2 more minutes. Dana? Okay, so while Dana comes back, let me introduce you to our next session. Session 2 will be next Thursday, same time, from 3 to 5 p.m. Korea time. And we will focus on urban resilience tools and digital government solutions for DRR. My colleague just wrote into the chat the link for you to upload and get familiar with the disaster resilience scorecard, preliminary version, preliminary assessment, and come prepared for this session that we are going to work in groups, and we try to get familiar with the tools and discuss the tool during the session. Let me see if we do have Dana back.
Hello?
Dana?
Yeah, do you hear me?
We do. Would you
Okay,
like to
sorry.
conclude your session? Thank you.
Yes, I'll just wrap up quickly. So next slide. Okay, so these are just the key takeaways I just wanted to highlight, as I mentioned. So the issues about governance, being strong, effective are very important. And the last one here, kindly go. I think next slide. I think many people sent messages they were not able to access the group work that will be used tomorrow. And I think Anna has shared it with colleagues. So we'll be using that next Thursday. And the second section is that participants are supposed to complete. Participants are supposed to complete these ahead of Thursday's meeting and join with their answers so that we can share together. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you, Dana.
Sorry.
No problem. We have really enjoyed your presentation. You give us a very good overview of the toolkit, and the toolkit is in the workspace. We will help you if you have not accessed yet the workspace. My colleague Charlie Sin, you communicate to our email address and we will help you to get into the workspace, because this is a community where we will exchange and we will learn from each other and share experience. So with this, let me thank the three speakers of this afternoon, Dr. Sanjaya Bhatia, Dr. Murali, and Mr. Samuel Dana. Thank you very much for this. And with this, we close the session. And I'll meet you all and invite you to join again on Thursday, 8th of April. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Choi.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Mr. Kim. And Mr. Shim.